just to reassure you in the context of the choir, I won't be breaking into song at all in my presentation. But I do want to take about 20 minutes or so just to talk a little bit to you about creating a sustainable business model, and in that context, what the value of values are. Now, it's clear to me that in the current environment, the evidence for the need for change is overwhelming. It's pretty compelling. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. It's not my area of expertise, but whether you're talking about climate change, whether you're talking about weather patterns, which indeed we are experiencing in the UK as we speak, or poverty, or human rights, or indeed, dare I say it, corporate scandals like the horse meat scandal or factories in Bangladesh. The need for corporates to think about this agenda in a different way, for me, is absolutely very compelling. And clearly, as part of this overall agenda, there are many stakeholders out there. We know that. NGOs, governments, investors, consumers, and all those stakeholders have a role to play in pushing forward this agenda. The question is, as corporates, of course, it's quite easy to step back, to sit back and wait for others to drive forward this agenda. I personally have been guilty from time to time when looking at issues of investing in energy-saving initiatives to say, well, shouldn't government be legislating on this to provide that level playing field against which all corporates can make those investments? The reality is, though, that if we wait for governments or other stakeholders to act, we may be waiting for some time. And I think there's a real compelling need for corporates and a big role that corporates can play in pushing forward this agenda in and of itself. We know that consumers care about this. Over 80% of consumers, when asked, think that corporate should put society's needs on a par with the needs of a business. And yet only 30% of those very same consumers think corporates do a good job of doing that. And corporates have a massive role to play. I mean, Sainsbury's, in and of itself, it's a FTSE 50 company. We employ 150,000 people. We source from 70 countries around the world. We deal with 17,000 farmers, 2,000 suppliers. We have 24 million customer transactions week in, week out. So we're not a massive company, but we have a big reach globally. And if you think about corporates more generally, the FTSE 100, just think about the field of influence that the FTSE 100 has on a global scale. I mean, it is huge. So corporates have a big role to play. They are much part of the solution as they are part of the problem. And from our perspective, at least from Sainsbury's perspective, sustainability, having a sustainable business model, is all about having a good business. It's part of equals good business. And is very much, in my mind, driven or underpinned by the values of that business. If you look at Sainsbury's heritage, even back, we started in 1869, in principle providing butter to London consumers at a time when butter was quite commonly adulterated with all sorts of stuff. And Sainsbury's at that time built a relationship of trust with its customers. They said, look, actually, if you come to us, you will buy the best butter in the world. And indeed, that's often cited. There's a book about Sainsbury's called The Best Butter in the World. Things haven't really changed much in the last 150 years in terms of the fact that the way that values underpin our sustainable business model. Albeit maybe we've become a little bit more sophisticated about the way we communicate and the way we tell the story. Nothing's really changed. So in 2011, we launched our 20 by 20 sustainability plan. Jim mentioned it earlier. It was part of the Naked event, or whatever it's called. And very much, our 20 by 20 plan, sustainability plan, underpins everything that we do in our business today, particularly under the themes around best for food and health, sourcing with integrity, respect for our environment, a great place to work, and making a positive difference to our community. These are very much things and ideas that underpin the way we do our business today. And as part of the research that we did in launching the 20 by 20 plan, we spent a lot of time talking to customers. And what's interesting is that most customers tell us that they do care about these issues. Over 70% say that it's very important in doing business in a responsible manner. And what was also interesting, at the time that we conducted this survey, 2011, of course, the economic climate was pretty tough, as it is today. And yet, even for those consumers you think might be most impacted by the economic climate, perhaps the lower socio-demographic groups, ironically, they saw this issue as being more important, not less important. So we may have had a credit crunch, but we haven't had a value crunch. Consumers today still see these issues as being important to them. What they also told us was, we talk a lot about what we call savvy shopping. Consumers are very savvy in the way that they shop now. They shop around, they try and find the best bargain. But we've come up with this term, savvy sustainability. Price is clearly a key factor in how consumers decide where they shop, but is by no means the only factor. 39% of customers actually choose quality as the key driver as to their purchase decision. That may mean that 61% base it on price, but nonetheless, 39% still determine that quality is what causes them to choose one product over another. 78% of customers say that they would rather buy British if given the opportunity to do so. So despite the fact that we live in quite tough times from a consumer's perspective, consumers still value values. It's very important to them. The second thing that came out from when we talked to customers was very much this idea of act for me. The issues that we are dealing with from a sustainability perspective are quite complex. They require quite a lot of thinking. Most consumers don't have the time to necessarily do all that research and determine for themselves what the right answer is. And so consumers expect corporates to do some of that thinking on their behalf, to simplify things, to present things back to them in a simple way. And there's a huge element of trust, and I'll come back to talk about trust later on, in the way that consumers expect and they trust organisations like Sainsbury's to think about these issues, to have researched them, and to have come up with the right answers and to communicate those in a very simple way to them. The third thing that consumers talked about also was, and again, what they said, what's important to them is things that are generally quite close to me. So first and foremost, who do I care most about in the world? Well, it's largely me. And then I care about my immediate family, my friends, and then I care about stuff more broadly. So that meant in the past that things that appeared more holistic or more global in their nature perhaps tended to be slightly less important to me as an individual. But with a world that's changing in terms of transparency of the internet, international travel, some of these issues are now becoming very real to life. They're becoming quite close to me individually. So whether it's climate change or food waste, these issues are now becoming closer to me as a consumer individually, and therefore more important to me. So we believe that having a sustainable business model is absolutely critical as a part of adding shareholder value, and we believe that that is very much underpinned by the values that we have as a business. We think we use the term our values make us different. We believe that our values create a point of competitive advantage between ourselves and our peers. We say it's a strategic point of difference. Just want to bring that to life a little bit with one example. So one of our values that we look at is obviously sourcing with integrity, and a part of that sourcing with integrity is about sourcing locally. And one of our objectives is to double the amount of food that we source from within the UK by 2020. And we know that's an important factor because 84% of our customers tell us actually that where their food comes from is important. And we know that 78%, as I said earlier on, tell us that if they could buy British, they would buy British, all else being equal. So we made a firm commitment to British sourcing. Things like fresh pork is now all British. Our fresh chicken has been British for over 10 years, etc., etc., etc. But we've also used this in our external messaging. This is not just something that we're doing internally, but we're also talking to the customer about it, communicating to the customer. So we have this campaign, same price, different values. which is meant to highlight that you can buy arguably the same product. In this case, it's Basics ham versus a Tesco, as in this example, a Tesco's equivalent. But we're arguing it's different values, so same price, different values. This product here is sourced from the UK, this product here is sourced from Europe. And we think customers do recognise that difference. We make that argument. We think that customers do care about these things and should be aware of these things. And we think that getting value for our values is actually a key contributor to the success the business has delivered over the last few years or so. Now, we often talk about lots of different dynamics when we're talking to investors about having a convenience business or brand match or our Nectar card scheme and our loyalty card scheme. But absolutely one key component that we do talk about to City and to stakeholders is our culture and the value of our values. We do believe this is a point of differentiation for us as a business. It's a key component. Now, I think probably fair to say over the last 3 or 4 years that we've been talking about these sorts of things, a lot of it falls on deaf ears because it's quite intangible, it's quite soft in a sense. But we are starting to see some traction, albeit I do want to just sort of show you this quote. I do quite like this quote because it's sort of it's fairly begrudging in its nature and it's almost a backhanded compliment, but from Niels Pratley at The Guardian, where he says, the moral of the tale, almost mundane by now, is that Sainsbury's value-driven culture, however wishy-washy it sounds, might be a source of some of this success. Note he uses the word might. We're absolutely convinced as the management team it is part of the success of the business. It is something that differentiates us in our business. It is something that motivates and engages our colleagues. It changes the way that we conduct ourselves, and we do believe it contributes to the overall success. So the big question, I think it's an interesting question for debate, and it may well come up in the Q&A session later on, is how do you put a value on values? How do you create the commercial case for changing the way that you do business, creating a sustainable business model underpinned by values? How do you create the commercial business case for doing that? And the answer to that question, I think, is quite mixed. And I want to take you through a couple of examples to illustrate that. But it really is not always clear-cut. I think particularly as finance professionals, and I don't know how many of you are finance professionals, but I know there are some in the room, as finance professionals, we always expect things to be quite clear-cut. It is just simply not clear. And most commercial decision-making in businesses is not clear-cut. You cannot create a commercial case for every single thing that you do in business. In fact, the vast majority of commercial decision-making is quite intuitive. And sustainability, and investment in sustainability and the values that underpin that is no different. So some investments have a very clear payback. Others you might need to extrapolate a few assumptions to get yourself there. And frankly, many are simply judgment calls. I think it's a really important point to highlight. I don't quite understand why there is such an emphasis when sustainability in particular is discussed as to why suddenly there's this need to create a really compelling commercial case that underpins it. The vast majority of commercial decision-making business doesn't always have that absolutely compelling business case. A lot of it is just a gut feel as to this feels like the right thing to do. I want to just bring that to life a little bit in some of the examples that I'd like to show you. I mean, we have a programme called our Energy Reset programme that looks at how we cut our energy uses in our stores. And so by introducing things like LED lights, doors on fridges, different refrigeration units, lighting differently at night when the night shift are working, and so on and so forth. Nothing rocket science, nothing difficult. We've managed to save our electricity energy costs in our store. So much so that in absolute terms, even though we've grown our store estate by 30% in the last 5 or 6 years, our energy costs have come down in absolute terms by 11%. And when you look at like-for-like equivalent by circa 20-21%. Now, to me, this is what we call in finance a no-brainer. This is not about creating necessarily a compelling business case, or this is of course we should do this. Even the most cold-hearted of CFOs, and I've met a few in my time, would recognise this as being the right thing to do. But that's easy. There's sort of other stuff which starts to become less tangible. So I don't think anyone in this room would say, actually, I don't think it's important that you have engaged colleagues in a business. Everyone here will recognise the value that we as a business, certainly as a retailer, have in having engaged colleagues, because engaged colleagues means hopefully engaged customers, and engaged customers hopefully means sales and good performance. So that's a sort of a fairly easy thing to say. But creating a business case for having engaged colleagues, that becomes a lot more difficult. How do you create a business case for creating engaged colleagues? Yet we believe as a business it's absolutely critical, as do most businesses. We invest constantly in our colleague base. We have our annual colleague conference, costs us a couple of £1 million a year. You can't create a business case for it, but we feel it's the right thing to do as a business because it engages our colleagues, and we think in the long run that pays dividends. We have investment. We put 22,000 of our colleagues through our training, food training colleges, obviously bonus. And that's in part recognised externally as well. So I think we're the only food retailer to be awarded the gold standard in Investors in People. So I think that's an example of where, intuitively one feels that's the right thing to do, but creating a business case that underpins that is difficult. But do we need to create a business case to underpin it to justify its existence? I think not. It's the right thing for business to do. And actually, this is the third example I just wanted to talk to quickly, which refers to the horse meat scandal, which I'm sure all of you remember in the last year or so. And what you saw at that time, actually, was that generally, and this is where I come back to talk about this point around trust, trust is absolutely critical to businesses today, because the issues that we deal with are quite often complex, as I made reference to before, and therefore consumers in particular trust corporates to do the right thing. And if you look at trust indices over the horse meat scandal, this is the horse meat scandal, you see that trust in the industry almost collapsed overnight. But one thing that we could say, as from Sainsbury's perspective, is that first and foremost that we had a good level of trust compared to our peers before the event, and arguably we bounced back. We didn't quite see the same dip as some of our peers, and we bounced back a little bit quicker than some of our peers. So there was a value in that the trust our consumers had in our business in that particular scenario. And how did we achieve that? Well, I think partly we've been able to because A, we didn't find any of our products contaminated with horse meat. But B, we've been doing DNA testing for 15 years. We've been doing, which obviously determines what's in a product. We've been doing isotope testing for 20 years, which determines the provenance of a product. And we've got 100 or so people day in, day out doing this sort of work and testing. Now, I guarantee you that nowhere within Sainsbury's ever did there exist somebody who presented a business case as to why we should be doing this. And that's not a glib comment, because I guarantee you, and with no disrespect to the discounters as an example, discounters are great businesses as we know and facing a significant threat from those businesses, but the discounters won't be doing this. There is a difference in the way that some businesses conduct their affairs in a way that we think brings strategic advantage. And I think one of the important things is as well, it's important to measure performance. And it's not just about the financial numbers. So we've conducted surveys that look at what our customers care about, and you see actually that generally speaking they care about being fair to employees, which I think intuitively you wouldn't necessarily expect, but that's the number one if you like, corporate and social responsibility that our customers expect from us. British sourcing, reducing waste, etc., etc. So we monitor what our customers care about, and we set ourselves, again, using our 2020 plan, we set ourselves objectives against each of these things that they care about. The important thing to note is, and you can't unfortunately read the detail on these, is that even for the lowest of the bunch, there's still quite a degree of customer care about these issues. And we on a regular basis, we look at how are we performing against these metrics, against these objectives. Whether it's, for example, Best for British, as I've already said, by 2020 we'll double the amount of British food we sell, or whether it's Active Youth, by 2020 we'll encourage 20 million children to enjoy physical activity in the decade. So it's important that when you create When you're looking at creating a sustainable business model within your organisations, you've got the right values, as I said, that underpin that business model, but you've also got the right means of measuring and tracking your performance. And that's not just financial performance, it's other metrics as well. And this, I think, is where finance comes in, because finance pretty good at measuring stuff, pretty good at dealing with numbers, and the role that finance can play in supporting sustainability, creating a sustainable business model in business, I think is increasing over time. If you look back historically, sustainability issues, clearly fell outside the jurisdiction of the CFO. That's increasingly not the case. I was talking to some of my peers on the panel earlier on. Sustainability actually fell in the remit of the CFO. And so it's becoming increasingly important for CFOs and the finance function to be engaged in this, not least of which for operational control and risk management, external sustainability reporting and assurance, and of course investor relations. So I think there's a big leadership role that finance can play. And as Jim perhaps alluded to earlier on, dare I say it, CFOs historically, perhaps some of us, have been seen as blockers or sceptics to this. So if you can convince the CFO that this is the right thing to do for business, this is initiatives that create shareholder value, then you really have got the business more broadly on your side. And at this point, I did want to make an unashamed plug for accounting for sustainability. Jim talked about it a little bit earlier on. We've really got here together a group of CFOs across the FTSE 100 to really focus on looking at how we can make sustainability, at the heart of corporate governance and accounting, and of course led by Prince Charles. I think it's a great initiative. It's early days yet. We're just starting out to look at, how corporates think about making sustainability investments, what are the business models that are used, how to take account of externalities, etc., etc. There's some really good work that we are starting to push forward in this arena. And if any of you out there have CFOs who are not engaged in this, and I would actively encourage you to go away from this and please talk to your CFOs, talk to your finance functions, and encourage them to get engaged in this, or to give me a call and talk it through as to what we believe we can get out from the work that we are doing. So just to wrap up, and I've no idea whether I've used my time up, so just to wrap up very quickly, I think corporates have a massive role to play. We really do. We can't wait for other stakeholders to act. We can act unilaterally ourselves, and we've got a big role to play in taking this and driving this agenda forward. Having a sustainable business model is about good business. We absolutely believe that it creates and develops shareholder value. It needs to be underpinned by a set of values within the business that support that sustainable business model. And that when you look at investment decisions in the context of sustainability, you need to accept the fact that you require a flexible approach. It is just not about the dogmatic looking at a pure investment case. You need to take account of broader factors. And there are many, many examples in business decision making where that is the case. This is not unique to issues on sustainability. This is part of taking the right decisions as a corporate, as a business. And of course, in that context, the role that finance can play, I think, is critical. The role that the CFO can play in leading this charge is critical. And of course, as always, there's still a lot more that we can all do. Thank you.